Michael Murphy, welcome to the Way of Champions podcast. This is so exciting to have you on.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
We've been chatting off camera here for a little bit, having a grand old conversation. You and I have never met before. You and Jerry have met before on a couple of occasions, but about 9-10 years ago, when I made this big shift in my life to start changing the game project and do this work, and then that I met Jerry through a very trusted friend of mine, advisor of mine, who's my cousin, handed me a list of books to read, and Golf in the Kingdom was on that list. And so you have been a part of my journey without us ever meeting. And so to have you on here was very cool. So thank you so much.
Well, good to be here.
Yeah, Jerry, why don't you jump in? I know you want to get this started for us today.
Oh boy, yeah, it could last all day as far as I'm concerned. So I'll put my glasses on here. I have a lot of different things I want to look at today with you, but I woke up this morning, Michael, and I was very nervous, and I'm never the kind of guy that gets nervous about anything that I'm doing generally. Although sometimes I do, but today I was excited to the point of, look, the truth of the matter is I'm talking to you. I'm talking with the person who simply single-handedly inspired me, and I don't think you know all this, to do the work that I'm doing. Before we really dive into some of these questions that we've posed, I'm compelled to address this ongoing question that so many of my national network constantly is curious about or ask me. And, it's like, where do I go with all this? How they say, Jerry, how did you ever, in your wildest dream, how did you ever come up with the crazy wild notion of integrating Eastern thought, Native American tradition, Christian mysticism, psychology, and put that together with sports? And it's like, okay, I don't know. And then when I stop and think about it, I have to say that it was all because of you. It was like your brilliant work back in the 60s with so many people that we'll talk about, 60s and 70s. I absolutely, for all of those listeners who appreciate the work I'm doing, I want you to know that this is the person who is singly responsible for me being who I am today. You paved the path. You paved a broad path, which landed me in the laps of publishers, sports organizations, being open to my work in the 1990s when I met up with Al Wong at Esalen. And so I'm going to blame you. I'm going to say it's your fault that this work has been accepted. It's nothing to do with me. I'll tell people right now, I'm a hole in the flute and your breath comes through me at all times. So
well,
that's
Jerry, you're very generous. Thank you for that compliment.
It's all true.
And I hope it hasn't gotten you into too much trouble along the way. So.
Well, I like good trouble. And as an Irishman, you can relate to that. In fact, O'Sullivan, Murphy, and Lynch.
Yeah.
This is like a Murphier, isn't it? Or something like that?
Well, there's a hint of danger already, but let's proceed.
Watch out.
Directions. This conversation, it could go in many directions.
Many directions. Yeah. Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, Jerry, what you wanted to kind of, I think, start them out on, or maybe I'll do it. Like you started out like your family, your dad was a doctor, right?
Oh, no, my father was a lawyer.
Okay.
My grandfather was the doctor who bought that land down in Big Sur.
Mm-hmm.
Where we started Esalen. And this was 1910. He wanted to have a spa, and so that land, fortunately, the family gave me permission to use it for this dream that became Esalen, a place to explore the sorts of things we're talking about right here. not limited to sport, but bringing different traditions, as you said, Jerry, East and West, you know, science and religion, etc. So anyway.
But you were on your way, I understand it, if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, Micheal, but you were on your way to be a doctor yourself, as John mentioned. And then somehow, as serendipity would happen, you happened to come across, walk past or heard or walked into a class that was very different than medical school, wasn't it?
That's for sure. You know, I was 19, my second year at Stanford, and they flipped the classrooms for a great professor there, Frederick Spiegelberg, whom I'd heard about, and they needed a bigger auditorium. So I was there for another course. I'd heard about him, so they announced it. It was the second day of the spring quarter, my sophomore year at Stanford. So I said, well, I'll just stay here. And it was like Alice fell into the rabbit hole. I went straight down and didn't look back. Honest to God, that's the way it happened. He came out on the stage and he stood in front of 600 students and didn't speak. And in those years, this was 1950 at Stanford, and you didn't speak. We'd never seen anyone do that before. And held the audience and said one word, Brahman. And it just took the class. It just took it right in. And at the end of the lecture, after which he lectured on the Vedic hymns of India, it was on comparative religions. And at the end, he told us about Atman, which is Brahman. So, as you know, Jerry, that Atman, our deepest self, the self of all selves, the self beyond the self, so to speak, is Brahman, which is everything. It's, in Christian terms, we could say the divine permeates this world. So it's a very incarnational statement. But anyway, I walked back to the fraternity after the class. I said, I'll never be the same again. And, I, honest to God, and stayed in this class and then became a certified religious nut and shocked the family and quit my pre-med. I was in pre-med then. So I quit that, quit my fraternity, and essentially took vows to explore these immense possibilities that you and I have studied. And one thing led to another, and it led me to Esalen and to sport.
But you had a stopover in India, I believe. And,
well,
that was quite influential as well.
Yeah, well, that was a primary step along the way. The ashram of Sri Aurobindo was the philosopher who had the profoundest effect of all on me by linking up the profound mystical insight expressed in a term such as Atman as Brahman in the Indian tradition, linking that up with the facts of evolution, that our universe is evolving, and the idea that the human race itself is secretly evolving towards a higher, greater life. That's the core of the vision of Aurobindo. I spent a year and a half, when I was 25 and 26 in India there, and that anchored my practice and my belief. And I came back here, and after a couple of years, started Esalen.
That was, to me, excuse me, John, I know you want to jump in with some good stuff here, but to me, it had to be that historically shot of spirituality, if you will, that when you came back and started Esalen, that had to motivate you to get in the whole human potential movement, which I want to talk about a little bit more with you. But you were certain because you had actually experienced and felt that transformative power of what you were thinking in a classroom to life. Is that so?
Well, that's right. I'm actually working on my own reflections these days, and you know, there are glimmers of this. I think in most of us that start around the time of puberty. I'm 14, 15. I was kind of coming up with my own primitive version of this. I grew up, you know, in Salinas, not far from where you are, and I was an altar boy. And but also a sports nut, you know. And
So was I. Yeah.
my father had taken us up to the Stanford to see the Stanford football games, 1940, when Clark Shaughnessy invented the T formation, Frankie Albert, and undefeated season, beat Nebraska in the Rose Bowl. It was like a enchanted, and then also golf, and we used to play Pebble Beach for $5, and can you believe it? And I got to watch, you know, Ben Hogan up close practicing, and et cetera. So sport is just, you know, it's my, it's the great mistress of my life, you know, and it's always there, either as a participant or a spectator. And so it was a natural marriage for me, which I had felt. And, you know, in my naive way, in my teens, and never having read this literature that I started reading after Spiegelberg's course. So it was a marriage made really in the depths of my interests, sport, and I don't want to call it religion. I want to call it this a direct experience of our greater depths. Call it the mystical depths of the soul. And so that once we had started Esalen, which was not centered around sport, but it led me in many ways toward this fusion of sport and let's call it what we will, because now the language is emerging, and that in itself is a story. We don't yet have, Jerry, the great history yet of what's going on today, right now, in the world of sport. And the problem is, well, if John, if you and Jerry Reed have ever read Harry Potter, or your kids or anything, the world is filled with muggles. And unfortunately, sports writers are 90% muggles. There's an occasional wizard, but these players in the NFL and the NBA particularly, I get a lot of feedback. Pete Carroll is a close friend. He's been for 45 years. He was a student at UOP. And so Pete and I heard from him yesterday, you know, at the Seahawks. And before that at USC. And then, so we've been friends. But he represents a streak in the world of sport. Phil Jackson and others like that. Phil Jackson was reading my book, Golf in the Kingdom, when he was playing for the Knicks. And he gave it to Michael Jordan, and so et cetera. So this is waiting it is unfolding, but it's a secret hiding in plain sight. The experiences that many sports people have. And I've been collecting hundreds of anecdotes, many of them from very famous athletes, who do not tell sports writers that they're having this experience for fear of mockery.
Yeah.
And strangely, many sports psychologists themselves don't recognize these experiences. Some do. So these new openings are emerging, and America is a stupendous engine of sports. And giving birth to these openings, which from where I come and the people through Esalen, these are the beginnings of a greater consciousness that's trying to be born in the human race, a greater life pressing to be born in us.
Beautiful.
And sport does a lot of things and requires a lot of things that the great contemplative traditions and yogas and martial arts require. I mean, we could talk about that today. It requires it, but it's not the reason most people play. We play because we enjoy the sport. And as we get entangled, if we're a professional athlete, we play to win. And we train ourselves. And along the way, we become, as it were, yogis. But no one tells us this. And we start having experiences that are sometimes, and I would say mainly, repressed. And that's the thing I most think is available to be done right now, is to lift the repression on these, on the sublime, on the mystical moments. I mean, it's something we could talk about today. But in any case, all of this just came into huge focus for me after I wrote that book, Golf in the Kingdom. And, you know, Norman Mailer, the writer, said every writer, if he really aspires, will get one free one from God himself.
And that's it.
That was mine. My first one, first book I ever tried.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it was like, I couldn't believe the feedback. And we could talk about that. And it just opened gate after gate after gate, doorway after doorway, so that now this stuff comes to me, and I'm like a unpaid anthropologist of the mystical and occult in sport. And if I go to say a country club, and it could be the squarest place on the planet, the most conservative gang, if they hear I'm there, someone's going to come up and tell me his latest mystical experience. And, you know, it's astonishing. And yet it doesn't, this stuff rarely appears in any newspaper stories or anything. There's some wonderful writers now at Golf Magazine, two guys there, Alan Shipnuck and Micheal Bamberger, both of whom are very open to this and know it, but they are exceptions. And there are some wonderful writers. John Updike was totally tuned into this. And then there are some sports psychologists and coaches like you, John. I mean, you're into this stuff, apparently.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's interesting, and it's funny you said the Muggles wizards, because I wrote that down here in my questions. And here's the quote that I saw you say. It says, "The wizards are a small minority, but that's okay. They get to glimpse all the magic." And I think what you're talking about, whether it's these athletes, the Kobe Bryants, the Michael Jordans, whether it's the coaches, the Phil Jacksons, the Steve Kerrs, the Pete Carrolls, Brad Stevens, we're seeing this new generation of coaches, of athletes who are glimpsing the magic.
Yes.
And they're also very open that they are glimpsing, and here's how you can glimpse it too.
Yeah.
And yet there's still this resistance to it. And I think maybe that's seated in this thing that if you need to go into your mind to get better, that's somehow a sign of weakness, not strength.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of reasons. I mean, that would be something we could discuss today for the resistance, but that is a subject in itself. And why? Some of it is, okay, a lot of it is a survival. I mean, if you're going to start telling the press that you're having these experiences,
oh boy,
you might have an ownership. Actually, I've run into this, or coaches, or even, here's the ultimate irony, even some sports psychologists who want to say, all right, take your mind off all that. That's just a flim-flam. Like in Zen, Micheal, this is all illusion. Just stick with your focus, your concentration, those things that you've learned to get with the flow, you know, that work for you. But don't tell us these far out things. I'll just give you one quick story on this. you know, they in the NFL they film practices. Bill Walsh started filming practices, and then you critique them afterwards, and you can perfect your technique, whatever in the play, and you design a play for the opponent that Sunday. Every game plan is tailor-made to the team you're playing. Okay, so here's a famous running back, and this he did many times. So they design this play, and there's a pulling guards. They pull out, and you tuck in behind, and this is a play designed to get you 6 yards for sure. Nothing fancy. You need 2 yards. This place will get you 5 or 6. This would happen to this guy. He would tuck in and break the play. He would break the play, go sideways, and run for 50 yards. So now they're critiquing the plays afterwards. And they say, now look, MacArthur Lane, MacArthur, look, yes, you got 50, but you had the play we wanted. That's what we practiced all week. Why did you do that? And he said, because I see the field from above. And they say, MacArthur, you don't. You're standing here. You cannot see the field from above. So tell us something that we can believe. Like, you felt something, didn't you? He said, no. I saw it. I saw this, this, and this. Okay. This ability to see the field from above, most people don't believe this, is an ancient superpower, siddhi in Sanskrit, in the Hindu Buddhist traditions. It's been described for 2,000 years. And as if to confirm this, recently, Billie Jean King, you remember her, the tennis champion, kind of came out of the closet for a second time, she said. She said, I have to tell you folks, because my brother, Randy Moffat, pitches in the big leagues. Both of us have had an experience all our lives. We wonder if it's genetic, of seeing the field from above. So in other words, now there are literally hundreds of these sorts of things out there that have yet to enter the full stream of contemporary sports psychology and of the world in general. So we have to build a belief system and all, and this is what my books have been about, you know, The Future of the Body, the big book, and it's to build a conceptual framework to understand this. And the argument that I have, and my friends in all of this, is that this greater life is pressing to be born in us all, and sport has this peculiar genius to bring it forth. Plus, it's fun. It's fun, and it's passionate, and it's wonderful, and we love it, and we do it, and most people don't see it. What's going on inside? They see the result, which is fabulous. Yeah. But it's too bad that, you know, it's been good for sales of Golf in the Kingdom, though. So, you know, and the few people who are like Phil Jackson is one who writes about this stuff.
Well, Jerry, I mean, I know you're like chomping at the bit here, because I think what we see a lot also, Micheal, is the coach doesn't like the player who sees the field from above, because that's going against the play that the coach called, right? So the coach's ego is in the way of that player being in the zone. And, you know, we had, I mean, Jerry, this just popped in my head. I mean, when we had George Mumford on the podcast, and he was talking and he's wonderful. And he was talking about Kobe Bryant and the, you know, different things he would do, and where does creativity come from? And like, you know, you see it in a certain way, but then you also put in the work so that you can go rogue, right? You can be creative. You can bust that play for 50 yards. Like, you can't just see it and then not practice doing it, right? And that's the thing too. So sometimes it's like the kid says, well, I wanted to play that pass, but I never see you staying after practice, you know, practicing that shot like Kobe does.
Yeah.
Jerry, what do you got? Yeah.
Oh boy, it's just so many thoughts going around in my brain right now. All the connections. Didn't know you knew George Mumford.
Well, I know about him.
Yeah.
But I've never met him, and we've wanted recently a new initiative here on the sport front to meet him. Do you guys know how to meet him?
Oh, yes. We'll make that happen.
Well, listen, hey, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. We'll definitely make that happen. Go ahead, Jer.
Well, where do I start? Like when you think of a Phil Jackson, affectionately referred to as the Zen master, which he sort of resists a little bit. Even his offense is created in a way that he's allowing the players to see above the court. Rather than have a structured offense where this is the first option, this is the second option, this is where the ball goes, you move it in here, you kick it out if you don't have the shot. What he does is he creates an offense which is very Buddhist-like in terms of its circular motion. And what that does is it gets everybody involved. So there's no set one. I mean, an out-of-bounds play, yeah, but what he does, he creates this offense which allows you to keep moving. There's a lot of movement and interspacing and openings and closings. And what you do is you actually start to feel the game as opposed to seeing it. And you're feeling the ball. You're feeling the motion and the movement. And that's his way, actually, of going back to your point, Micheal, which is seeing the playing field from above.
Yeah, well, there are different ways. Yeah, say that. Isn't that interesting? Because these American games, particularly football and basketball, have become extremely complex.
Mm-hmm.
And it challenges the athletes to do things that nobody's ever done before, actually. So it's filled with novelty. And the game itself, it's as if the human race has created this enormous living laboratory for great things to happen, but doesn't know how to really read all the dials. In other words, we've created something bigger than our understanding, I think. So some of us who, have fresh eyes, we bring an outsider's look, but insider, outsider, both. And that's been my privilege because I wrote that book, Golf in the Kingdom, and then went on and then had Esalen. It gave me a lot of windows into this, but I still have to admit that though a lot of people have talked about it and glimpsed it, there are still enormous inhibitions about it. There definitely are. That come from we could talk for hours about what those inhibitions are, but they have a lot of motive. Ego, as you said, John, the fear of losing standing by talking too much about it. Part of it, I think, is actually Zen wisdom. You don't talk, just do it. Don't be talking about it too much. So that can come into play too. But I think still today in the modern world, it's still fear and inhibition that, or just plain old ignorance that keeps the curtains closed on this inner game.
Yeah. I love your expression in Golf in the Kingdom when you talk about the astronauts of inner space. And that's so beautifully phrased, and it captures so much. And I use it often in terms of my thought patterns. What were you thinking of when that came about? How did you come up with that one? That was great.
That started at Esalen when we started a program. It was not focused in sport, but 1966. See, we started in earnest in 62. So it was my idea to have a 9-month long program to really go far, because typically what happens at Esalen, people come from all over the world, as you guys know, and for a weekend program or a 5-day program. And often they have some epiphany, some satori, some opening, some wonderful moment, and then go home, and it fades away after a couple of days. So the effort to sustain it requires practice, long-term practice. And so we thought, well, if we do this for 9 months, we'll make a difference. And so this phrase came up. Actually, the reason I think it started down at Esalen is one of our first participants was a academic clinical psychologist who was born in the same hometown as John Glenn, who was the first guy in outer space. So we started calling him the first astronaut of inner space. So this, he came from Athens, or I forget, Athens, Georgia, or New Athens, wherever John Glenn came from. Ed did. But anyway, it's stuck.
Yeah, dimensions of consciousness that have not been explored yet. And to this day, it is still, as John said, you still feel some resistance. Although when I started out in my professional stuff, I didn't have nearly the resistance you might have had. And it was a little more opening to that. And but I still feel that people are still like a little hesitant, you know, like, let's not talk about the Buddha, you know, let's talk about this. And
Well,
yet they crave. I could be wrong, but I think they're craving what you're talking about. They're craving it. They just don't know it.
No, absolutely. It is a universal human aspiration that has emerged in the great world religions, among some of the greatest philosophers. But it's been a vast flirtation with this greater life. It hasn't sunk through and through. And one of the things we're planning to do in the future is to bring together these very few isolated paleoanthropologists who study shamanism. Going back now to some of these caves 45,000 years ago, where down in those caves, they were doing something weird and far out. They were doing something we don't fully understand. And but the people studying this, you remember Carlos Castaneda. This was kind of his territory.
Life-changing.
But he, and he came to Esalen in '64. And so I knew him for a long time. And but anyway, we want to get these anthropologists. In other words, this has been a long, slow birth in the human race, waking up to these superpowers that we really have in our, potentially in us, and these states of consciousness. And of course, Jerry, you were writing about that with Al Wong. I mean, seriously. And so that's what Esalen's been all about.
Well, you know what's interesting, Mike, is we have today, right? So I forget, it was in the 70s when the psychologist Csikszentmihalyi coined the term flow, right? And so all of a sudden we had a word to describe this feeling that every athlete has probably had at one point. Every person who, I grew up on Long Island, driving down the Long Island Expressway, and all of a sudden you're 40 exits later and you're like, wait, how did I get here? Right? Like, and that's flow, right? And we want, and all athletes know that when I am in that state of flow, I perform my best. And you asked me how I did that, I couldn't tell you how I did that. It just happened. It didn't require thinking. And it required this perfect state of challenge and ability and this balance. And so everyone knows that we want it, but I think what you're saying is, as soon as we start talking about it, because that's not an outer thing, that's an inner thing, people get scared, right? They get scared because maybe I don't really control that. But now we're starting to see people who are claiming that I have hacked flow, and I'm not sure that they have, but I think at least it's good they're talking about it.
Well, Csikszentmihalyi, that's one body of work that has really contributed to this. Steve Kerr and Seth Curry, they are very much into it. So certain lines of inquiry, mindfulness, the Buddhist mindfulness has emerged. So slowly and hit and miss here and there, this is emerging. And maybe it will just keep emerging more and more and more. And here, a conversation like this, somebody listens to this, somebody reads this book, and suddenly it pops to the front. But we're foregrounding all of this. We're bringing it to the front of the stage, and not keep it always backstage. So anyway.
Well, John, it sounds like some of the things that you and I have talked about and what we're doing with our conference and trying to just keep it public and keep it out there, right?
Well, because there's someone just like you found, Micheal, in the 1960s, there wasn't 7 million people lined up to sign up at Esalen at that point, right? There was a couple, right? And I think in the world of sport and coaching,
right,
there's a couple who were saying, wait a second, I can coach a different way. I can relate to athletes a different way. And thankfully, we have very public examples of a Steve Kerr or a Pete Carroll who can coach a certain way that are giving the high school coach, the youth coach, permission to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Amen. That's right, Pete. It's been a great pleasure for me. I met Pete. He was a 25-year-old graduate student at the University of Pacific. And my friend Glenn Alba, we grew up together in Salinas over there, Glenn and I. And Glenn became Bill Walsh's roommate in San Jose State. And so we got to know Bill Walsh through that and got to know Pete. And then Pete started finding his way, and he was coaching defense for the 49ers for a few years. So to watch Pete manifest it more and more, and he really broke out completely on his own at USC for 10 years. And then now at Seattle, it's been fun. So like, to get the backstage story, and dealing with these personalities. So some of these sports stars, and I mean, extremely alpha males, some of them, and how you keep a team like that together and find a language that they all can buy. I mean, there's been a problem with Pete. It's not only that the sports writers can be muggles, it's that the players themselves can have their own resistance.
Yeah.
So to find a language that works for everybody. Pete's good at that.
I have a friend who coaches this type of way. He's the England, the UK national team basketball coach, or the youth, and he coaches a certain way where he's asking his players, to use this metaphor I like, to see the court from above, to think about it, to do it, and he coaches a pro team there as well, and he says he gets these internationals who are really buying into owning their game and thinking about it. And he says, then I get these American former college players, right? They're not in the NBA, but they're good players. And I'm trying to get them to think, and they're like, can you just tell me what to do? Right? Don't make me think about it. Just tell me what to do, because their whole life, they've been taught that the answer is not within you. The answer comes from coach.
Yeah.
And yet the greatest players know the answers within them.
Yeah, well, see, there's right to the heart of it, John. I mean, that right on that one. Oh, amen. Amen. It's a complex business, and the religions have always had this problem. The mystics usually ended up they put them in jail.
I was going to say, or dead.
But they didn't call them jails. I mean, the Pope had to discipline St. Francis of Assisi. It was too much for everybody. And we actually at Esalen now have a project going with the Vatican to study St. Joseph of Cupertino, who was the most famous levitator. Now, you may or may not believe that he did this, but he was observed for 30 years by literally thousands of people rising off the ground. Okay. This was in the 17th century. Galileo was alive then. So we've gotten the Vatican to give us all the archives of the canonization proceedings where people are testifying, and we're going to try to bring that to the surface. Now, this is, see, we've never, as modern people, we've never actually filmed anyone rising off the ground and staying up. We haven't.
Nor would we believe it with the miracles of videography either.
Yeah, we would. Yes. They would think, oh boy, they certainly faked out.
Esalen's got quite the special effects crew. Yeah. Yeah.
John,
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was having a conversation with you about Micheal, and one of the things that a lot of people really should know is that, Mike, your mentors, we're talking Aldous Huxley, Joseph Campbell, George Leonard in particular, Alan Watts, and others, uh, big influence on you and your life and your way of thinking, and how that impacted your books and the work that you've done for so many of us.
Yeah, that's for sure. Huxley, as we started Esalen, was, helped us with the language to talk about this, and the term human potentialities, which we started using in our first brochures, 1962, that came from Huxley.
Yeah. Human
Because,
Potential Movement, was that it?
the human potential movement, that phrase, George believed that we invented it. I have no memory of that. George felt we did one night. I remember exactly the conversation referred to, but however it popped up. But we used the term human potentialities because everybody can understand that. It's putting all this in a plain brown paper bag. I mean, it's making you can understand it. But if we had started the Institute talking about the advent of the supermind or the progress of the Geist or some big German term or used fancy Platonic language or this. So it was the question of language, and then Huxley's uh, uh, language about a number of the first leaders that we had at Esalen. Fritz Perls, Gestalt therapy, he was describing this, and of course all his stuff on psychedelics. And then the others you name were all great influences. Alan Watts was there a lot. Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. George Leonard was, he and I were very close from the day we met. We used to say, from the day we met in 65, Esalen had been going for 3 or 4 years, but probably not a single week passed for the next 40 years where we didn't talk. I mean, we were that close. So he was a great influence. But those were all Abraham Maslow.
Maslow.
Yeah, Maslow was
Linus Pauling.
Well, Linus was never a friend, and but he was someone to admire. He was not really into our field. He had a summer place in Big Sur, but he won 2 Nobel Prizes, in chemistry, and then one in a Peace Prize, I believe. But he was not close to us. But
Alan Watts.
Well, Alan Watts. I mean, I had known Alan within 3 months of being in that class with Spiegelberg back in when I was just 19.
Yeah, he was the one.
I had known him 11 years before we started. But we did have a tremendous conclave of some of the leading spirits of the day. Paul Tillich. We had to deal with the National Council of Churches in the 60s. Most people don't realize this, where theologians would come and come into these practice formats, these groups we were doing down there, and then reflect on it theologically. So Bishop Pike, who was quite a character, and a number of people like that. So it was, we had the ultimate metaphysical rogues gallery meeting down there. I mean, we had, and part of the way we thought about it is to have a massive show of firepower to show, look how many of the world's leading thinkers are headed in this direction. Now, this is the 60s. And Esalen has been subject to the tides of fashion that can move in different directions, And the mood, there was a tremendous backlash that occurred in the 70s President Nixon, and his circle worked to put us out of business, destroying our reputation. They, by planting these awful stories about us in the media. So there are all sorts of people who are influences, some large, some small. And there's a great book now, the chairman of our board, Jeff Kripal, that book called Esalen, it's about 700 pages. It's far and away the best thing ever written about Esalen. If anybody wants to know our history, he's come into that. He's a star today in the field of religious studies. And he put 7 years into working on that book. So if anyone wants to know what really happened, that'll tell you. Because, Esalen's also been very controversial, as you know. And from both the left and the right, politically. From, a lot of the fundamentalists on the right think this is where Satan comes to play. And a lot of the Marxists and others on the left think that what's all this inner life about? We have to get out and feed the poor, and Black Lives Matter and all the great social causes. But what are you doing navel gazing down there at Esalen? So we've had to, steer our ship through these conflicting political tides and social tides. So that's been in play. So there have been a lot of influences on us.
I don't even know where to go from here. I feel like, Jerry and I both, again, like we said, 3 Irish guys, having this conversation. Jerry and I are products of Catholic education, New York City, Jesuit university for me. My grandfather was also a Baptist missionary and a minister. My mom grew up in Burma and India and China. Working with him, he worked for a group called Moral Rearmament for many years. And,
for God's sake.
And so I all these different things. And the only thing that just keeps popping into my mind as we're talking all this is my grandfather, when I was a little boy, would take me mountain climbing, and we'd go to Mount Washington in New Hampshire, the highest peak in the Northeast, not mountains as we know here in the West. And I remember saying to him, "Grandpa, why do you like to climb mountains?" And he says, "Because mountains bring you closer to God." And I, of course, as an 11-year-old, I was thinking of that in the physical sense, like, oh, of course I'm closer to God. I'm higher up, right? But as you get older and you realize what that really meant was that was his place that he would go to quiet his mind and look inside and really get connected.
Yeah, we had a little break there, but it's okay. Anyway.
Flowing right into it.
Yeah, flowing right into it.
So, Micheal, I knew this right from the first moment I met you, that you very passionate about running in your day.
Yeah,
you love to run.
Well, yeah. I started when I was 43, and this coach Mike Spino.
Yeah, he was down there, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was the influence on me and a whole gang of us. 1973. So that the running boom started. So I got competitive. I came in third in the national championships in the mile for 50-year-olds. Age related.
Right.
And I got down to a 4:32 1500 meter when I was 53. So
that's world class.
Well, for 50-year-olds, yes.
Yeah.
For 50-year-olds, and
I know that's world class.
And I raced against Bill Fitzgerald, who held all the world records for 50-year-olds in middle distance. Well, he certainly had the mile and the 1500 meter, and we actually raced to the end, and then he beat me at the end and set a 1-year world record in that race. So it was my little flirtation with
running glory.
Yeah, for the 50-year-olds.
That's awesome. There's another line. I mean, Jerry mentioned the line, the astronauts of inner space. There's another line, and I think I'm just paraphrasing it, Micheal, from Golf in the Kingdom. And it's a quote from one of your characters, and it's golf is all about what happens in between the shots. And it's just, I remember reading that and pondering over that, as a golfer, as a sports person, and then, but just, I mean, that's really, life is what happens between the shots, isn't it?
Amen. Amen, brother. Amen.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I appreciate you guys' appreciation. Yeah, Peter Jacobson, he's a very widely loved character in the world of golf. He quotes that line quite a bit.
Mm. Maybe I read him. Maybe I was thinking of him saying that or whatever. But yeah, it's so. But yeah, I mean, he said I remember him saying in that text then that made golf so much more enjoyable for him.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
When I'm over the ball, that's what I'm focused on. But in between, that's where I get the joy and the camaraderie and all that sort of stuff.
Well, it's an interesting game, isn't it? I mean, let's say you're out there 4 hours. You're actually swinging. I think it's between 3 and 4 minutes of the 4 hours where you're actually. Now, of course, the way some guys line up for a putt, they can take an hour per putt.
Yeah. There's a few exceptions.
Yeah, but the swing. So it's such a sensuous thing, particularly if you're playing a beautiful golf course. And these are the world's biggest gardens. Never in human history, 25,000 of these gardens from 100 to 250 acres. And then you get to play something like Pebble Beach. And wow. And it's never the same. These course like that, it's never the same. I mean, the way the weather comes and to go around like a zombie and not, feel it and enjoy it is like an awful lot of us live our lives. Mm-hmm. I mean, we go through like zombies. I mean, and the capacity for enjoyment, I do, I can get off on my high horse here, but there is in our American culture, I mean, we're such a work-oriented and obsessional culture in many ways. If you're impoverished, it's out of need, of course. But here's when you've got money and you are living like this. And so out on a golf course, it's astonishing. You go to a place like Pebble Beach, you pay $550 now for a round. It's one of the most beautiful pieces of land in the world with all these moods and all of these things. And not to enjoy it, it's really, it's sad. Mm-hmm. So that line actually has caught on. The book has sold more than 1 million copies. That certain lines just float around all the time. That people, as they finally started to enjoy the game, people play it, and at times you wonder it's just a place of suffering. I mean, there are certain players. It's horrifying to go around with them. The degree of suffering and anger and frustration and throwing clubs. And I mean, it just.
Yeah. I mean, I live in this like beautiful area where if you play any golf course around here, you're staring at snow-covered mountains. And I think about that, right? Or we were talking about Bandon Dunes before or whatever. I was riding, I was talking to a friend who's a big mountain biker the other day, and we were talking about riding a certain ride. And there was a while where I was like riding, and what I was focused on was that clock, right? Let me ride it faster. Let me ride it harder. And I remember him saying, that's an incredible view from up there. And I was like, I've never noticed, like, what the heck am I doing? Right. And so now I notice it. And guess what? I only ride 2 minutes slower. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
Micheal, I think, we're getting close to our time, but John and I, we can go on forever. We got the gift of gab. And I don't know how this makes you feel, but your influence is spreading, whether you're out there or not, because John and I, we do a lot of work in this area. We're pretty nationally recognized for a lot of the things we do, and people show up because they want to hear the messages that you're talking about. They want to hear a different way. They want to see things from above, and they want to have an attitude that will allow them to really have fun, play
Yeah.
the game with fun. And John and I, we get into this, and these are the conversations we have with our network of people, and they seem to crave it. John, I think you feel the same way, and there's a lot of talk about it. We get a lot of good feedback from these podcasts. We've had people beside yourself like Steve Kerr and Anson Durans from Carolina, and these are people, and these are people who really get it. And but I don't. But you must feel at some level a feeling of deep gratitude that in your lifetime you're getting to see all these changes really take place, and it's beautiful to watch.
Well, it's been a tremendous, tremendous trip, and I am very grateful. And it helps, Jerry, to hear you say that to me. I mean, I appreciate it very much, and John, because I too fall into zombie mode, and we, there's been, a lot of Esalen's history has been hard work. It's been a bumpy ride in many ways, just holding a place like that, together. So to hear it from you guys, I mean, it's very helpful, and so I can say yes. There's no doubt about it. This vision of things that we share is emerging fitfully, but there's so many things that go wrong all the time, that certainly with me and some of my friends, we get into these wrestling matches and lose the light for a few hours or a few days. So it's always good to be able to talk with friends and new friends about all this. And it's important to have these conversations. It helps. And we share what we've gleaned along the way.
Absolutely.
It's we're creating, I think, don't you guys think we are to a certain extent creating a new society within the society? It's kind of a fellow seekers, fellow experiencers. This is how society is formed. I mean, we share stories around the campfire,
Yeah.
Been going on since the Stone Age.
Well, you've given myself a lot of permission when I was intimidated by the thought of even considering talking about this stuff. Once I saw you guys were doing it, it was like, okay, someone's doing it out there that I respect, so I'm going to do it. And then I pass it on. Then I meet John, and now John's talking this way. And then we're all in this together. And it just keeps evolving.
Yeah.
And so the conversations are deep. And I can tell you, I am very encouraged by the amount of people who really want to be in that space, in that place. And boy, is it helping the world of sports. And my goal, as is John's, is we want to change the world of athletics, because when we do, then the whole world will change too. Because as you so astutely said,
Amen.
Athletics is such a microcosmic classroom for all of life.
Oh, amen.
And here we are using sport as a vehicle, and it's a better world because of it.
But it's this might sound to a lot of people as a silly thing or blasphemous even, but it has an advantage over most religions in that it's based on fun and joy. and beauty, you know,
Mhm.
and adventure. Um,
Well,
instead of just being scolded every day. You know, a lot of
mhm.
us, you know, who grew up religious. I was a altar boy, but Episcopalian. You know, that's Catholicism light. You know, you don't you, you don't have to believe
Half
much.
the guilt. Half the
And
guilt.
Without the guilt.
Half the guilt.
yeah, and you don't have as much guilt, although there's more than enough left over. But you know, all the shoulds, you know, and the suffering that so much religion has caused, alongside giving us all the good things. And sport, you know, it has this genius
Yeah.
for joy.
Did you
Uh,
ever have you ever heard of Sister Marian Irvine?
no,
She's the bless her heart. She's often called the running nun. I think she's in her late 80s right now. I met her at. She came to one of the I don't know, back in the 80s, one of the seminars or something I was doing with runners, and so on Saturday night we were having Mexican food, and there were a few margaritas that were had by Sister Irvine, and I said, "So what are you going to do tomorrow morning? You know, Catholic nun. You know." She said, "I'm going to go out for a run." I said, "But wait a minute, I'm Catholic, you know, or I was a Catholic." And it's like, "Okay, so are you going to miss Mass?" And she said to me, "Jerry," she said, "are you kidding?" She says, "I feel closer to my maker on a run on a Sunday morning than I ever would in those churches."
no,
And another person who really was a great spirit, a kindred spirit like all of us, who really was willing to give permission to others to do what their heart felt, you know, like follow your heart, as
where
Castanedas always said, right?
where
Follow
did
your heart.
where does she live?
I think she lives up in the Bay Area someplace.
Sister Marian.
Sister Marian Irvine.
Marian Irvine. I'd love to meet her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I hope she's still alive because I've lost touch with her. But
yeah.
I'll never forget that morning. And every time I go out, I'm in Santa Cruz, and you know Santa Cruz. We have the redwoods right up here,
Oh yeah,
and that's where I run in the morning. And it's like sacred. It's like, oh my, you know, it's
yeah,
like I really get my ideas and my thoughts and my connection with my deeper soul, you know.
yeah.
And why go into a church and you know,
Well, there it is.
we
There
probably
it is.
lost some listeners already, but
Well,
that's
yeah. I mean, I always say, and this was a conversation I had with my dad, who said, you know, when on a Sunday morning I was like, "Oh, I'm going, you know, I'm going skiing," or something like that, and he said, "But it's, you know, it's Sunday morning, it's Mass," and I said, "Dad, is it better to be, all right? Is it better to be in the mountains thinking of God than sitting in church thinking of the mountains?" Right? And
well, that's brilliant, John.
well, I didn't make that one up, but I have stolen
That,
it.
that's brilliant. I love that.
That's a great
So
line, actually.
yeah,
Yeah, that should be
so
in your next book. Definitely, it's going to start
yeah,
off
I
your
don't
next
know.
book.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. This was fantastic. We covered a ton of ground here, and
It's
lots
been
of
a
thoughts.
pleasure.
And yeah, this was
Been
this
a
was really
pleasure to be
wonderful.
with you guys.
Did you
Yeah.
stop record yet?
No,
John?
I'm still going.
Oh,
Should
we're
I?
still going.
Yeah,
Great,
still
wonderful.
going. So all I want to say is thank you, Michael. Thanks for being on Way of Champions, and Jerry, of course, thanks. And
Well,
we'll put all the
for those listening, I owe my life to Micheal because everything I do today is a reflection of that. And hopefully, we continue to influence each other and grow and make it a better world through sport.
Well, all the best, you guys. What you're doing is really great. Um, and thank you for
Oh,
having me on.
thank you, Michael.
It made my day.